Our next verb is the PUT verb. Now, the PUT verb is quite similar to the POST, but there is one very important difference. The PUT verb is used to modify resources. If you remember, POST is used to add resources, and PUT is used to modify them. So if you remember the CRUD acronym we mentioned at the beginning of this section, the CRUD that stands for create, read, update, and delete, then POST is used for the create, and PUT is used for the update. The rest of what you need to know about the PUT verb is quite similar to what we said about POST. A PUT request should contain a message body that specifies the resource to be modified. A PUT request should not contain query string parameters, and you see an example here. So in this example, you should not include the company equal 15 parameters. Again, because it's quite similar to the POST verb. So, having said that, let's see a short demo of how to implement the PUT verb. So, here we have our biceptor, our loyal biceptor. And again, let's click the mocking rules and let's create a new rule. And I guess you can guess already what's going to happen. We will select here PUT. Here we will type API and order. And in the status, we will just modify it to updated. Updated. Great, and the status will be 200 as usual. And let's save this rule. Now look at this list of the APIs. You can see that apart from the first one that we used as a test, all the other API have the same URL with API order. The only difference between them is the verb. This is the get, the post, and the put. And from the REST API point of view, these are a completely different APIs. Okay, so now let's go to Postman, and we will simply modify the verb here, and instead of post, we will go to put, and that's all. Now you remember that when testing the post verb, we've got the status created response. So now I've only changed the verb, and let's click send and see what happens. And we've got the updated status, which is exactly what we wanted to get. And of course, the status is 200, just as we defined in Biceptor. So as you can see, put and post are very similar, and the only difference between them is that post is used to add resources, and the put is used to modify resources. Now let's go back to the slides, because there are some interesting topics to discuss about put. So, what do you think should happen if I put a resource, but the resource does not exist? How can I update a non-exist resource? What should I do in this case? So the specification states that in this case a new resource should be created. In other words, in this case, the put should behave just like post. But to be frank, you can use your own discretion. You can also choose to return some kind of error message stating that you cannot update a non-exist resource. So again, do whatever feels right for you in this specific context. One of the most important definition of the put verb, and one that is often ignored, is that put should be idempotent. Now, if you're not familiar with this term idempotent, then let's explain it a bit. What idempotent means is that if we have some kind of action or a method, then no matter how many times we execute this method, the result will always be the same. Now, to understand it fully, let's talk a little bit again about the post. If we are sending a post request to create an entity, then an entity is created. And if we send the exact same post to the server, what happens? So in this case, we will have two identical entities. Well, probably not really identical, probably the ID or the key of the entity will be different, but the entities themselves will be identical. So we can see that post is not idempotent because the number of the entities that will be created is identical to the number of the post request I send. However, with the put, the behavior is quite different because no matter how many put requests I send, there is always a single entity. So with put, I can be sure that the data is consistent and no redundant entities were created using my code. So when you write the code that implements the PUT verb, always remember that put should be idempotent, and no matter how many times the PUT request is executed, the data is always consistent and no redundant data is created.